Okay, hello everybody. This is Surayya with the Purposeful Professional Media, and we're back with a podcast for your career, the people, and the culture. I'm very, very excited to once again have Dr. Nicole Cabrera-Salazar with us, and we're going to be talking about something that recently happened. So this is kind of like a real time response to what has been happening in the diversity. We could say aspect of education of academia. As you all know, the Supreme Court overturned and ruled against race based admissions, essentially removing, well, not race based admissions, but the use of race in college admissions, essentially removing affirmative action from ever being able to be used in higher education to determine who to admit. It was just one of many factors, but it was a factor. And at the end of the day, we want to talk about it, especially because since that has happened, it was announced that MIT's diversity has dropped significantly for Black and Latin students. So we're here to share our live reactions and also brainstorm some solutions. So yeah, back to the conversation, back to the issue area. And I'm really, really excited to talk to Dr. Nicole because she is an academic and she does work in STEM and she advocates for people and diversity to be present in STEM. So I'm very excited to have this conversation with her. Okay. So if you want to reintroduce yourself, Dr. Nicole, you can to the people on the podcast.
Sure. My name is Dr. Nicole Cabrera-Salazar. My pronouns are she, they. I am a former astrophysicist turned social impact entrepreneur. I got my PhD in astrophysics in 2016. And in 2018, I founded my company, Movement Consulting, and we work toward fostering radically nourishing cultures for marginalized people within the STEM space and within organizations.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for the work that you do because I remember seeing this and I was like, okay, we have to get you back on for this part two to discuss this and discuss what's happening. I'm also in the diversity space, so this is such a passion of mine. So first and foremost, we did reference a couple articles, y'all, and I will share them in the description box of the episode. One was an opinion post from the actual New York Post, and it basically talks a lot about this person basically feels like, oh, well, affirmative action being revoked proves that Asian Americans were discriminated against. As you all know, Students for Fair Admissions, which is funded by Edward Blum, came up due to this need to prove that other races were taking spots from other races. It got very ugly and it resulted in the overturning of affirmative action. And then we also reference a BBC article on this verdict and MIT's impact, and then also an NBC News video. So we're going to give you the information in the description box. But I do want to ask you, Dr. Nicole, like reading the articles, like first and foremost, like what emotions came up for you? Or even hearing about this, what emotions came up for you?
Despair. So, anger. I don't know. I think it's in a way unsurprising. Of course, we were expecting these outcomes because what a lot of people may not understand is that before we had affirmative action, we had a lot of disparities in race, gender, class of people getting into higher education, right? So
Mhm.
universities, college, especially in STEM. And
Yeah.
so affirmative action was like all we had to be able to remove at least some of the barriers that marginalized people experience.
Hmm.
And it wasn't perfect, but it was something. And now we don't even
Yeah.
have that. And so
Mm.
this is what we were expecting, these results.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to go over exactly what the article said and the statistics that were provided by MIT, and we can discuss that. But yeah, lots of emotions, mostly
Yeah.
negative. I mean, negative 100%.
Yeah, so I mean, I can totally agree with you. I can agree on the despair part. I first of all, when the verdict happened, I actually penned a column that said like affirmative action was never the problem. And people were like, "Oh my god, like don't say that." But the truth is, the problem is that we even had to have it in the first place. And it was
Right.
never intended to even really cause as much harm as it has caused, but it's caused a lot of harm because it's caused a lot of division, and it's caused a lot of, oh, you're an affirmative action admin. Just like how now we say you're a DEI hire, right? And
Right.
you're right, it wasn't the best thing, but it was the only thing. And now that we don't have it, what is it? What is it that we're supposed to do? Personally, I see a lot of different data. This one article reference BBC says that MIT says intake of some minority groups has fallen from 25% to 16% in 1 year after a Supreme Court decision. So that's BBC's report. I also heard that the percentage of Black students went from, like, was it 13% to 7%? That was another article. So basically, people are saying, all in all, like, there's less Black students, there's less Latinx students, and I can only imagine there's less Indigenous students, the minority groups that tend to not be I don't know, seen as being as qualified. And this whole situation, it just shows that affirmative action, was it the best? No, but it was all we had. And yes, there was a lot of misinformation around it, because I'm sure you've seen reports about who has benefited from affirmative action most, right? It isn't necessarily the people that are being told that they're benefiting from it, right? So there's all this misinformation going around about it as well. But I also think that it's hurtful that it had to get to this point. Somebody had to create a group, go to Capitol Hill, say that students of
Right.
certain racial backgrounds get in with lower scores don't deserve it. It hurts that it had to get to this point, because at the end
Yeah.
of the day, everybody's just trying to survive. Everybody's just trying to succeed. And we need these systems, not necessarily affirmative action, but we need systems that take into account our historic identities. And
Mhm.
that's what it did. That's what it promised to do. But that's
Mhm.
what it kind of did. And the fact that it's like, oh, we don't even need that, we want to get rid of that. It's like, so what are you going to do to make sure your campus is diverse? You have
Right.
nothing else really to stand on. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, something that we might get into a little bit later, the reason that we needed affirmative action in the first place is that there's such a huge disparity between
Hmm.
white Americans and people of marginalized races. There's a lot of intersection with race and class. If you are, for example, a Black child, you're almost 3 times as likely to be poor than a white
Yeah.
child.
Yeah.
The fact that, where you are born, your zip code, is going to be the primary determining factor in not only your education, your socioeconomic status, your health, um, your morbidity.
Mm. God.
So
Yeah.
there are something that I think baseline we need to understand is that there is a huge disparity in the United States when it comes to wealth, when it comes to income, class, and race. And
Mm.
this is something that has been in place from the beginning. It goes all the way back to when the United States was founded on
Yeah.
the massacre of indigenous people, when slavery was established. And, there's a lot of pillaging and a lot of
Mhm.
wealth being established, and a lot of differences that are being established throughout the history of the United States. That wealth disparity is only growing, right? So more
Yeah.
and more wealth is going to a smaller percentage of people. And
Mm.
so we needed something when people started to realize, that there were these disparities. That means that before you even come into college, when you are
Yeah.
going through elementary school, middle school, high school, the courses that would prepare you for a STEM
Mm.
degree in college, that would give you the preparation that you need, the barriers that there are, such as standardized testing, the
Yeah.
SATs being a
Mhm.
prerequisite for getting into college, all of
Mm.
those are determined by where you live as a child.
Yeah.
And even Black children are more likely, or sorry, let me rephrase that. Elementary schools that have a higher percentage of Black children
Mhm. Yeah.
have receive less federal and state funding
Mhm. They do.
than schools that are primarily white, regardless of the income of the parents.
Mm.
So even then, you're talking about a huge disparity, right? So
Yeah.
all the way through childhood, adolescence, and then when you get to, by the time you get to college admissions, there's already
Yeah.
such a huge gap that the admissions, like if you look at these numbers and you say like, okay, why did we need to have affirmative action? It's because you have
Mm.
a whole like history of these injustices and of discrimination that is happening that need
Yeah.
to be rectified in some way. We need to adjust the numbers in some
Mm.
way so that we
Ooh.
can start to try to achieve parity. What does parity mean? Parity
Yeah.
means
Mm.
that you look at the US population and the way that the US population is divided among race, right? You
Yeah.
want that percentage, those percentages to match different industries, right? You want colleges
Mhm.
to look like the United States, right? We're not
Yeah.
saying like, you know, if the United
Mm.
States is
Ooh.
I don't know the numbers currently, but like let's say that it's
Yeah.
20% black folks. We're not saying that we want 50% black folks in universities, but we want at least 20%. We want it to look like the rest of the United States. And so,
Yeah.
and it wasn't looking that way because guess what? We have a lot of racial discrimination in this country. It was literally
Mhm.
founded on that. And so, affirmative action was like just one tool that we had to be able to rectify the barriers that were already in place. So,
Yeah.
let's just start there
Mm.
to give the foundation to talk
Yeah.
about it and why the removal of affirmative action by the Supreme Court last year has had such a tremendous impact.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That is why I want to have you here, because I think you could give voice to it in a way that even many of us cannot, given that this is your work and this is what you do. So thank you for being so well researched and also being able to articulate that to people. I think what you said is 100% on point. Like, we can't standardize sociology. You can't standardize somebody's lived experience and try to
Mhm.
get it on a scale and determine this person deserves more than this person. I think that like you said, even when we look at STEM disparities, funding disparities, the path to an elite education for a black child looks very different
Mhm.
from a child of another race, or even for a Latin child, for a child of another race. I think like unfortunately, these social constructs that we don't want to acknowledge have a lot to do with how we live, how we are educated, the resources given to us, the opportunities given to us. And I just think the criticisms of it, it was almost like you're trying to knock the one thing down, like we said, that can maybe potentially help us to get that parity. Can we ever achieve parity? That's a whole nother conversation. I don't know if we ever can achieve it. But I do think that having gone through the admissions process myself, I understand that what got me there looked very differently from what got my white peers in the same position. And I think that these
Mhm.
programs are so needed when an application is opened, to think about not only our history, our history as in our family, whether our parents are educated, and not any of that, but like our ancestral history. Where are we coming from? Where are generations of our family coming from? And Justice Ketanji Brown like released a dissent, because obviously she didn't agree. I think she was one of the
Right.
minorities that voted against it, and her dissent was so beautiful because she talked about UNC Chapel Hill, which is one of the most, we could say, prestigious public universities in the country, prestigious universities in the country. Period. She talked about, I think she highlighted two main characters, Jack and John. John's family was enslaved on the same land that UNC Chapel Hill was developed on, while Jack's family was able to get, we could say, a 200 to 400 year head start. So of
Yeah.
course John is black, of course Jack is white, right? And she had to paint that reality for us to make us understand why we need programs like that. Because at the end of the day, there is a huge disparity. We're not going to overlook enslavement. We're not going to overlook immigration, and
Oh yeah.
we're not going to overlook these processes on how people are viewed and the struggle of assimilating to a new culture, whether you arrived here as an immigrant or whether you arrived here enslaved in chains. These
Mm.
things matter, you know? So I think that woo, I echo everything you said. 100%. I agree. I echo it. And I think that is a good segue to our next question, because we talked about the fact that, like, hey, like, this program was intended to be a program that helps people to receive parity, right? Essentially, my second question for you is, do you agree that Black and Latinx students, or Latina students, or even Indigenous students might have been boosted under affirmative action at the expense of students of other racial backgrounds? Because that's one of the arguments against it, that they were boosted at
Mm.
the expense of students of other racial backgrounds. What do you think about that?
The only way to really quote unquote believe something like that is if you
Hmm.
believe that people who are not white are inferior,
Yeah.
right? And so because essentially the core of that sentiment, which is the sentiment that is very popular in the US, it's touted by
Yeah.
politicians, right? Like,
Mhm.
around affirmative action, people talk about it. You have to believe that every seat in that college belongs to a white person to
Mm.
say that anyone who is not white coming in is taking that spot away from a white person. And
Yeah.
essentially that means that
Oof.
whiteness is superior and will always be more
Mhm.
excellent, will always be
Yeah.
more meritorious than any other race, right? And it's
Mm.
interesting because the New York Post article that you mentioned,
Yeah.
um, they talk. So let's talk about the numbers a little bit.
Yeah.
So the numbers that
Mhm.
we're seeing is that so MIT reported they're one of the first colleges to report their numbers of admissions after the Supreme Court decision last year. So the numbers that they reported is that Black students enrolled dropped from 15% just last year to
Yeah.
5%.
Okay.
Latina
Mm.
students
Okay.
dropped from 16% to 11%.
Yeah.
But Asian American students rose from 40% to 47%. So that
Mhm.
New York Post
Yeah.
article, I mean, it's an opinion. So
Yeah.
it's not based on any facts. It's just somebody's opinion.
Yeah.
And they're talking about how, you know, they are like applauding these numbers. And they were saying
Mhm.
that because affirmative action was removed, people who have this mindset, they argue that affirmative action was discriminatory
Yes.
toward white students, right?
Mhm.
And this New York Post opinion
Mhm.
um, argues that it was affirmative action was also discriminating against Asian American students, and that these numbers
Yes.
prove it because since affirmative action was removed, the number of Asian students went up
Mhm.
of it at MIT, right?
Yes.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that a little bit. You know,
Oh my god.
so there's a lot of history here. I don't know where you want to start. I feel myself like getting angry, but I have a lot of facts to bring to people. So
You could jump in and I'll jump in when I'm ready. Yeah. Start. No, because this goes into like the model minority and my next
Mhm,
question, which you know what my next question is. So you could just jump in where you want to jump in. What I do have to say is I understand what you're saying, and I feel like the first thing that popped into my mind when I read the New York Post article, which was the opinion based article, is number one, divide and conquer. So the fact that certain
yep,
minorities have been pit against each other in this, we could call like, I'm going to say it, it's my podcast, white supremacist ring of like, oh,
sure.
fight to prove that you're better than the other groups. Right. And I think
Mhm,
that it goes back to that. It also goes back to the fact that there's this model minority. Some people say it's a myth, some people say it's not, right? But there's this aspect of, you know, we know for a fact that Asian Americans excel at standardized testing and
mhm,
excel at the metrics aspect, right? So I think
mhm,
that they're countering DEI. We talked about it in our first conversation with meritocracy, right? Merit, excellence,
mhm,
intelligence. So at the same time, it's
mhm,
like if we see that, if we look at the SAT, which now they're getting rid of it, I'm glad they're getting rid of it. But at the top schools, you still do have to take SAT or ACT, one of those tests, or a bunch of AP tests, or a bunch of IB, International Baccalaureate, whatever, to get in. There's still
mhm.
this process of like, we need to see you test at a high level before we take
Right,
you in, right? So I think
right.
that if they score higher than other groups on average, there's this thing about, okay, we're moving away from diversity and into merit, they're more deserving. That's I think
Right.
that's kind of the logic around it. Like, okay, we're
Yeah.
using the test as a proxy for deservingness, but like you said, it's deeper than that. It's like
Mhm,
it's the deficit hypothesis. It's like certain people are intellectually inferior. So every time we
right.
give them a spot, my boss's son couldn't get in. Like so I
Right.
newsflash, I went to one of these schools. I went to Wharton, and I know how it
Mhm,
felt to be a Black woman walking through these
mhm.
halls. You definitely
Yeah.
feel like somebody's boss's son on a yacht wanted your spot,
Right.
and they don't make you forget that. And I'm sure it's
Right.
the same in the highest levels of
Mhm.
STEM and in academia and stuff.
Mhm.
They don't make you forget, hey, somebody else could have had your spot. Just be glad
Mm.
to be here. So all of
Yeah.
these things are rooted in these fundamental, like we're talking about, these fundamental assumptions that, like, okay, if I test higher, if I score higher on a test, maybe I'm more qualified than someone else. If their score might be lower than me, this isn't diversity, this is meritocracy. And then, like I talked about, the model minority of like, oh, well, we do score better, we do perform better, we are better students. So why are our spots going to other people? So it's
Right.
tough because this has essentially become, we're taking the sociology and we're trying to quantify it. We're trying to make it a numbers game
Right.
and discount certain students off of GPA, off of test scores, off of
Mhm.
not having the most
Right.
prestigious internships or the most AP exam scores that are super high. And like, these are issues of resource and opportunity, not intellect.
No, absolutely. And you mentioned
Mhm.
the model minority myth. So if any listeners want to learn more about this, on our podcast, The Daily Radical, we our latest episode was called "Asians Are Not a Monolith," and I spoke
Mm,
to Chriselle G, and we talked about how damaging actually it is to Asian people that we have this myth um that they're, you know, smarter and better, and like the model minority that other minorities should aspire, other racial minorities should aspire to. So there's a lot of information there. But I want to say, so there's so
yeah.
many factors leading into this. So first of all, we have to look at the fact that test scores and GPA are correlated most to parental income. Okay.
Mm.
So
Okay. Thank you for
if
adding
you already have a disparity of income and wealth, right?
that. Mm.
That's going to show up in test scores. Now, if we talk
Yeah.
about Asian Americans and wealth, okay? On average, Asian families have about 1.3 times the average wealth of white families. So you might think, oh, like Asian Americans, you know, they're like on top. However, when we say those numbers, that doesn't take into account, first of all, that Asian Americans are all lumped into one group,
Yeah.
even though there's huge disparities in ethnicity, in class, in
Hmm.
experience, in
Yeah.
immigration status with different Asian ethnicities, right? There's also a high amount of debt among the Asian American community. That
Mm.
number is not taken into account when we think about income, right? And also there's so many factors that play into that. So that number is deceiving at best.
Yeah.
And then you have the racial wealth gaps among other races in the United States that goes all the way back to the 1930s
Mm.
when the Federal Housing Administration was established,
Yeah.
and they literally said that a mortgage loan for a house was not economically sound if the neighborhood became more than a certain percentage black.
Mm.
So you have at least 70 years of wealth building to
Yeah.
where I think white Americans now have like 8 times the wealth of black families in the US.
Hmm.
So, okay, if we're just looking at income, then these test scores are correlating with income. So, what we're saying is that when somebody scores high on an SAT or they have a high GPA, it's not about the fact that they are smarter or better at school. It's about the fact that they have more access to resources, which makes sense because
Yeah.
if you think about it,
Hmm.
if I come from a wealthy family and I know I have to study for the SATs in order to get into college, and I need to score high on the math in order to get into a STEM degree, right? Then what can my parents do? They can hire a tutor. They
Yeah.
can make sure that I get like, you know, they can buy test prep materials,
Mm.
right? So there's just more access to resources. Probably the schools that are largely composed of white students have more resources. They have more federal funding. They can offer AP classes, IB classes, like you said. They have textbooks. They have technology. The students can
Mhm.
learn coding. There's like so many
Absolutely.
resources available to them. So
Yeah.
already the GPAs and the test scores and the access to resources are all correlated, right? And so by the time you get to college, when you are competing with other people and you don't have affirmative action to remove the barriers that were already pre-existing, what
Mhm.
happens is then there's absolutely no way to stop the gatekeeping from happening, because what you're going to do is you're going to use a standard that is biased in order
Yeah.
to say who deserves to get in here.
Mhm.
There was another episode that we had recently called Academia's Great Regression, where Dr.
Yeah.
Irini Lambridis talks about how the businessification of higher education in the United States,
Mm.
how it's becoming more and more and more of a business. Matter of fact, most of a university's resources goes to staff than to
Yeah.
professors. So we're seeing like
Mm.
this huge, like, you know, corporatization of US higher ed institutions. Even public institutions are being operated like a business. And so they
Yeah.
want more students to come in, undergraduate students, because they pay a hefty tuition and that there's more money for the university, right? That also
Mhm.
has an impact. And if
Yeah.
you have like if you want large pools of students coming in and you are recruiting a lot of students, there's going to be a lot of applications and you have to distinguish them from each other in some way. And now that we don't have affirmative action, all of that is going to go to test scores and GPAs, but that is
Yeah.
purely
Mhm.
determined um by probability. Like, what, just the chance that you were born into a white family or a black family or a Latina family or an Asian family. So all of that is interconnected.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes everything that you're saying makes a lot of sense. And it echoes the point about resources and opportunity, because that's what it's boiling down to at the end of the day. Like you said very eloquently, the test scores of the GPA is, it's actually like there might be an algorithm where you can put in your zip code, you could talk about who your
Right.
parents are, you could talk about what race you are, and it's going to determine what test scores and what GPA you have. So, and you even added that layer of like even going into STEM. So we could think of MIT as like the STEM school, right? If we want to bring it back to the context, what prepares you to be able to go to a school like that, except taking the hardest science and math courses in some of the best schools, or taking the AP, the IB courses in computer science, in chemistry, in biology, really developing that strong foundation so that when you go to a school like MIT, the science of all sciencey schools, you can effectively go there and hold your own, right? So I think that when I think of this, I think about my own journey through higher education, and the fact that if I would have saw a verdict like this, I would have never turned in my application. I came from a predominantly
Right.
black school. I did not come from the legacy. I did not come from the
Mhm.
pedigree.
Right.
Granted, I did well in school, but I definitely benefited from them looking at my application and seeing, number one, I come from an all black high school. Number two, I'm the daughter of immigrants to this country. And number three, I did not come from the upper quartile of wealth. These were the things that they looked at when they looked at my application and decided to see my potential in spite of that. I also want to deal with the misinformation that we technically have lower scores and lower GPAs. Not necessarily true.
Right. Yeah.
I think that your GPA is based on your high school. So, I mean, I've
Right.
taught high performing high schoolers from, I was a part of a program with the National Education Equity Lab, and I taught high
Mhm.
performing high schoolers from Mississippi, Philadelphia. They were high performing. They had high GPAs. Granted, their schools might not have been as competitive as some of the other high
Right.
schools, but they were super high performing and they did have high GPAs. The SAT, I think, is more of an area of concern because of the fact that you talked about prep having to be
Yeah.
um invested in for someone to do well. So your GPA is school dependent. You can go to one of the roughest schools in the hood, but if you're like one of the smartest kids there, you most likely are going to have a high grade point average. So I
Right.
don't think that is really where the discrepancy lies as much, but rather it's the stupid test. I gotta say it. It's the stupid AP exams. It's the stupid SAT. It's a stupid
Right.
test, and that's exactly where they're trying to argue people down. And granted, like I said, I compare all the time, and I'm like, if you score 1400 in the SAT, this old 1600, I don't know if it's still 1600. I think it is because it was when I was in high school. They went from
Mhm.
2400 to 1600. If you score 1400, you're automatically in the 90th percentile. Like,
Right.
why do we have to get so granular when the difference between a 1400 and a 1500 is what, 5 questions? I think
Right.
we need to stop putting futures in stupid arbitrary metrics. So it's a lot that I think about when it comes to this, like resources and opportunity, because even if you do perform well in your high school, which think of it this way, like most of the kids going to these top schools are getting full scholarships, whatever, did perform very well at the context of their high school. There's still
Right.
this invalidation of like, oh, well, your high school wasn't rigorous enough. Well, dummy, it wasn't rigorous enough because they didn't have the resources. Can we
Right.
stop trying to move the goalpost and just acknowledge the excellence where it is? So I think personally, it's personal for me. Everything you
Yeah.
said is personal for me. And I have to
Yeah.
echo that, like, resources and opportunity, because that's really where it lies. And this stupid like meritocracy thing, there's no such thing as a meritocracy. We got to break up with that. And we have to realize, like you said before at the beginning, it's about getting your university to look like the United States. And if you
Right.
don't want your university to look like the United States, why are you here? Like, why are you in
Right.
America if you don't want your children? Because a lot of parents are behind this. I'm gonna call it the
Right.
parents. The parents are behind these organizations saying certain people shouldn't be getting in because they're salty that their best friend's son didn't get in or whatever.
Mm.
Why would you want your child to be educated in the United States if you don't want them to be exposed to the diversity of the US? It's this whole mindset of like certain people are deserving and certain people are not is problematic on so many different levels. But I
Yeah.
had to just talk a little bit about my journey and how I fall into this. You
Of
also
course.
said something about the model minority. I want to bring that up and say I'm also very aware that that's a myth, and I'm very sensitive about how we talk about those things on here because
Mhm.
it does take into account the many different groups within the Asian umbrella. And
Right.
I think even like every single ethnic group, there's so much diversity. So when we talk about
Oh
model
yeah.
minority, we're really talking about the rich Asians. We're really talking about the lighter skinned Asians. We can bring colorism into this too. We're
Yeah.
really talking about a certain type of Asian that popular culture shows as being more appropriate,
Right. Right.
or more Asian than the others. Because every in group, whether
Mhm.
the Black community, we also have very similar issues with like the right type of Black, right? The right type of what is the right type of so oftentimes when they talk about these outliers, these successful people within minoritized populations, it's because they're oftentimes most likely lighter skinned, wealthier.
Mhm.
They're the
Right.
right type of minority. So is there
Yeah.
really a model minority?
Yeah, absolutely. I
Mhm.
wanted to go back to this SAT question because I was, I came from a very poor background, and I happened to go to a school that was an engineering magnet program. So I got
Mhm.
some education that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise based on my zip code because I had to be bused there. And it was like 45 minutes away. But I did relatively well on the SATs, not great.
Mhm.
But when I was in college, one of my jobs, because I had like 3 jobs when I was in college just to be able to
Yeah.
stay sustain myself, and that's on top of, both federal and private student loans because I went out of state for college. One of my jobs was that I worked for I won't say the name, but it's a national SAT prep company. So when I
Yeah.
was doing I did 3 weeks of training with them, and this is like one of the courses that if you come from a wealthy family you could purchase. Is probably around at the time it was about around $1,000 for some I don't know, maybe like 10 weeks or something of
Mhm.
prep, and uh, I was training to become one of the instructors.
Yeah.
And imagine my shock when what they were teaching us was how to basically beat the exam. It wasn't like because I
Mm.
came from a background of like I came from a STEM background, like not in
Yeah.
my elementary school, but like I did well in math and science, and so I was put on these tracks that I was very lucky actually to have encountered in my high school. Um, so
Mm.
I studied for the SAT thinking I need to know math, I need to know science, I need to know language. I need to have this knowledge in order to pass this exam. But then when I was training to become an instructor, it wasn't about that. It was like if you see this type of question on the SAT, here's a trick that you can do. And you do this trick, you don't even solve the math problem. You just do this trick. It's most likely. So they basically are when they prep you, they're prepping you in the way the exam is written. It's almost like a meta prep. They're not teaching you the skills that is purportedly being tested. They are prepping you on the actual exam itself, how it was written, how it was standardized, and what little tricks you can do to solve those problems quickly, so that you can answer all of the questions as accurately as possible. And so I was completely shocked. I was like, "Whoa! Like this isn't even a real thing. Like it's really not." So
Yeah.
when we talk about like test prep and having access to resources, that's something that we really need to understand, is that when you standardize an exam, it's going to be biased by the people who write the exam. And of course, if there's like a standard way of writing these questions, then there are these probably not even loopholes, but it's just like you can study to ace that exam without having any knowledge, without having
Yeah.
any critical thinking, without
Mhm.
having, like the creativity that you need in order to succeed in these fields, right? And so
Yeah.
not
Oof.
only do test scores correlate with parental income, test scores do not determine your level of success, point blank, period.
They don't.
It's to the
Yeah.
extent that even the exam companies, so the SATs are given by an exam company, just like the graduate record examination, the GRE. If you want to get into grad
Mhm.
school, you have to take that exam. All of these companies have a disclaimer saying that a high score does not correlate with success. So
Yeah.
what are we doing? So what are we doing?
Oof.
Right?
We're gatekeeping. We're continuing to gatekeep. We're continuing to make it about, like we've said, resources, merit. We're continuing to gatekeep, and that's essentially what the test is. It's a gatekeeping metric, right? Because if your
Absolutely.
score is based on your ability to get get these resources, get this cheat code, it becomes an
Mhm.
income competition. It becomes, the
Right.
haves and the have-nots. It doesn't become an issue of. It's funny how we use words like merit. Well, we really need to be saying income, right?
Right.
We like it's ridiculous. There
Right.
is no merit. So I
Right.
think that's amazing that you were able to like break it down and boil it down to that level. I think that
Yeah.
is, yeah, you're right. What purpose are the tests serving? Because they're
Yeah.
not really serving a purpose, except what I will say is the discouragement of certain people. My high school, a lot of people didn't go to college because they didn't do well on the SAT at all.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
shameful that they let a low score get them out of get them out of college completely. And college
Yeah.
isn't about being perfect. It's about improving what you already have. So
Yeah.
it's tough because like I tell somebody all the time, I had this conversation the other day. I'm like, if you beat down somebody's confidence at 16, you get a 800, 700, your confidence is shot. You don't think college is for you. That's why we have so many people trying to be, I'm from New York, so everybody's trying to be a rapper, musician, everybody's trying to be a hairstylist or a nail tech. And granted, love my hairstylist, nail tech, like do your thing, especially like I love watching them as we all do on social media, doing their thing. But it's also like this person needed to realize you had options. You didn't have to be a rapper if you didn't want to. You didn't
But
have
that's
to
the
be a
thing.
nail tech if you didn't want to. You had more
I
options. You just didn't see it.
well, I feel like the point is that there aren't other options. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I
Yeah.
think the system sets us up so
Mm,
that if you have a low SAT score, right, it's not only affects your admissions, it also affects whether you get scholarships.
or
And
not.
again, if you
Yeah.
come from a low income background and you can't afford to go to school, the reality is that you probably won't be able to. And also,
Yeah.
I would take it even a step further, that a college education is not better than a vocation,
No, it's
right?
not.
It's not better, but
It's an option.
it is something
Mhm.
that you need in order to climb the social ladder, in order
Mhm.
to increase your chances of increasing your socioeconomic status, which is like so difficult to do, right? Like some majority, like I think like 45% of Americans are like, or maybe it might even be a higher number, are like one crisis away from losing their housing. Like they're like,
Mhm.
there, most
Yeah.
Americans don't have savings. It is
Mhm.
expensive to live here. It's getting more expensive every day. And I would say that, like, even having a college degree as a prerequisite for so many jobs that don't need it. I mean, the vast majority of people listening, like, in the US, you're going to major in something and then you're going to get a job that has absolutely nothing to do with your
Nothing to
major.
do.
But it is
Mhm.
just a piece of paper. It's so expensive, but it is a requirement that is becoming more and more egregious, right? Because like it is becoming untenable to get a college degree, but if you don't have one, then you literally cannot, unless by a lot of luck or a lot of privilege, quote unquote, make it in this country.
Yeah.
So I think we need
Mm.
to look at that because it's like, okay, what purpose does it serve to get rid of affirmative action? What purpose does it serve to have test scores that correlate with parental income and gatekeep and make sure that we don't have the quote unquote diversity that we see in the American public? Well, it does serve a purpose. It's not purposeless. Do you know
It
what I'm saying?
maintains the
It
system. Yeah.
makes exactly. It maintains the status quo, and it soothes the people that stand to
Mm,
lose the most
yeah.
by
Ooh,
by you know this in this capitalist system. We're taught that everything is a zero sum game. If I have and somebody else wants to have more, I have to give up what I have, right? And in a way, actually, for 90% of people, that's not true. It's only true for like the top 10%, which is becoming a smaller and smaller percentage of people. You know, there's like a lot of wealth hoarding at the very, very, very top, right? So it's like, yes, those people have to stop hoarding wealth, because literally, like, how much money do Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos have? Way more than they could ever spend in their life, in many generations, actually, right? And so we have to think about it that way. It's like, not only does it maintain the status quo, it literally is a system that is preventing marginalized people from having a life that is outside of capitalism, right?
mhm.
Like the whole
Yeah.
point, the whole point is,
Oof.
if we cannot
Yeah.
achieve this socioeconomic status requirement, which is a college degree, then what's going to happen? Then you have more laborers to
Yeah.
work to the death to make somebody else richer.
Yeah.
And we don't want that to be white people. We want to, so
Mm,
as a majority white nation that is quickly becoming a minority, right? White people
mm,
are becoming a
yeah.
minority in the United States. It can
Yeah.
be soothing if somebody tells you, and this is how whiteness has operated for centuries now. It can be
Mhm.
soothing if somebody's like, you can make it, to the poor white person. The rich person says, you can make it too because you're white, as long as these other
Yeah.
people don't come your way. And the
Oh my
fact is,
God.
that's not true, because poor white people also suffer, right? But
Mm,
the whole point is to create division among
yeah.
races. We don't have class solidarity. That is the whole
Mm,
point. Do you know
yeah.
what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oof. You touched on it. You touched on it. And we talked about it earlier, like this divide. Like, what are they trying to do but divide us through
Right.
all of these classifications? Who deserves it? Who doesn't deserve it? And what I will say is, um, these sentiments hurt the students, even those that get in, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
even those that make it through, right? Make it through that tough STEM program, or make it to this elite institution, or make it through that PhD program, it hurts them because you're grappling with this reality. I remember when I was sitting, literally walking Penn's campus and grappling with the reality of, like, man, I was one of those. I went to high school with people who today feel like they can do nothing more than cut hair or
Mm,
be a nail tech. It made me realize the gravity of the chance I've been given.
mm.
And I didn't take that lightly. And granted, I didn't pursue a traditional career and I had insecurities around that. But the reason why I had insecurities around that is because when you get into these spaces, now you feel like, man, I'm one of few. I have to perform the best. So I
Right.
have
Of
to
course.
do so much. Like the amount of and love my alma mater, but I have to say this. The amount of unpaid labor that the students of color do for these
Yep.
institutions to
Yeah.
prove that we deserve, where we're leading every committee, we're
Mm.
we're trying to be at the top of this, we're trying to win this and that. It's
Yeah.
almost like we were racing each other to prove that we
Yeah.
belong here because we
Yeah.
didn't feel safe. We didn't feel safe in the position because it's like, man, I
Mm.
I'm one of few. I don't feel safe. I feel like I constantly have to prove myself. So I saw my peers of color feeling like they constantly have to prove themselves, especially my black peers, leading every committee, winning every award, trying to
Mm.
work for the most prestigious firm, trying to get into the most
Mm.
prestigious grad school. It's almost like amongst each other as minorities, it was crabs in a barrel,
Mm.
literally, because it's
Right.
like, man, we're a minority in this space and there's only a few spots. I got to make sure that
Right.
I stand a little taller than you so that you don't
Right.
become bigger or better than me. So it even hurts you,
Yeah.
even from inside the walls of these institutions, the fact that there's so
Yeah.
much conversation about worthiness, or even like, oh, you took somebody else's space. Man, I struggled with that. did I take somebody else's space because I didn't grow
Yeah.
up dreaming of going to Wharton? I just happened to get in, and I
Yeah.
think of all of these things, and it weighs on you as a student of color. It weighs on you, and you end up feeling like you have to overperform to prove yourself. And it repeats a cycle. Like, I broke away from it and ended up, doing what I do now. But many of my peers can't think of becoming an entrepreneur or even doing any advocacy work, because it's like, man, I just want to work for Goldman Sachs. I just want to work for, because I still am chasing their approval. I'm still chasing their approval. Like,
Right.
after an elite degree, it's like, oh, I need the elite job. I need the money. I need the vacations at Martha's Vineyard. And I see so many people still jumping onto that. And I'm like, man, it hurts us. It really does hurt us in the long run. And it's sad, but we lose
Yeah.
ourselves in the process of trying to prove that we belong or that we're deserving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like it's so sad, right? Because I think it goes back to this whole idea of like capitalism, that our worth is tied to our labor, and that
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
we only are worth as much as we can produce. And that is in academia, I did a PhD, and that is a resounding theme, because you are only worth as many papers as you publish, as many citations as you have, right?
Yeah.
The grades that you
Mm-hmm.
get, the awards that you get, right? And you become such a cog in the system, and you're no longer recognized as a human being, right? I mean, we shouldn't even categorize ourselves by our jobs as humans, right? And I think it's coming to a point, because there's a huge call right now for the unionization of many different industries, including
Mm-hmm.
academia, because
Yeah.
of the way that even the pressure on professors
Mm-hmm.
to receive tenure, they have to have high performing, quote unquote, students.
Yeah.
And so, and unless they have that, then they can't get a permanent position. They can't get a promotion. They can't have like a stable job. And so there's this pressure coming from, well, you have to perform like at this level. And to me, it's really sad, because I'm
Mm,
like, it totally, ¿cómo se dice?
yeah. Yeah.
It becomes completely devoid of the original meaning. Like, I went
Mm-hmm.
into astrophysics because of the wonder and the awe that I had for space. But then it became something totally, ¿cómo se dice? Distorted.
Yeah.
And it became more about the production of papers, and less so about the humanity of the people. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of reckoning with that. I think in every industry in this country, there we can feel the unrest. I mean, people are demanding that the United States stop engaging in these military projects that are harming people, that are committing genocide.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like, there's just, and I think this goes to, every sector, not just STEM.
Mm,
But I do think that, like, it for me, everything always goes back to capitalism, right? Like,
yeah.
how does this tie
Yeah.
back to, why do we even, ¿cómo se dice? I'm not finding the right words, but it kind of
Mm,
feels like even this idea of like, oh, I didn't think that I could amount to anything more than like cutting hair or being a nail tech. I
yeah.
think even that needs to be unpacked, because
Yeah.
it's like, why do we even have jobs? Why do we have to have
Mm,
jobs in order to survive? And it just
yeah.
barely survive, you know?
Honestly, like, it brings me back to this concept of privilege, and we talked about it on the first call. But
Mhm.
oftentimes, you're right, we see people in these careers. Number one, a lot of people are, because I think there's this movement of like, if your job doesn't pay you, I'll leave it. Well, everybody
Mhm.
doesn't have that option, right? So
Right,
the unionization of industries is happening because people no longer want to leave. They just want better wages. They just want people to see
right,
their humanity. People are
right.
like, I could think of like education and what's happening in education. Teachers
Mhm.
leaving education for tech, for other fields. Some teachers have that level of mobility, but everyone doesn't. And if
Right,
everyone leaves, who's going to teach the kids? So I
right.
support the unionization of these industries, because at the end of the day, it's like people don't just want to pack up and leave anymore. What if somebody actually likes their job? They want to do it. Back to this like nail tech, being a barber, being a rapper, being an influencer, whatever. Quick, I would call it like fast money careers, because you can go far in these careers
Yeah,
monetarily, right? But at the same time, it's like, I don't want our people to be limited to that. I don't want people to be limited to that. I think about it like in this sense of it takes privilege even to come out of an educational institution like and say, okay, I don't feel like I have to do X, Y, and Z, what's presented to me. Because frankly, I even feel
Yeah.
like for people of color at every level, the nail tech, barber, job, whatever expected job looks very, very different. Like for me, where I went to school, if you're black and you weren't working in investment banking, like, oh, you're a dummy because like this is where all of us go. This is where we're gonna go to get wealth. This is where we're gonna go to finally be free. And it's like, what? Wait. This concept of like what we're expected to do. Honestly, what I realize is it exists for people of color at every single level. And
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
pretty sure you have people who are like, well, we
Mhm.
see you as being a professor, we see you as being a research scientist. Why are you doing this movement consulting? Why are you doing like why are you
Right.
doing this? It's kind of like the more impactful and innovative work you have number
Mhm.
one, you have to be privileged enough to be able to take that hit in income that it takes to build
Absolutely.
these things, right? So that
Period.
is an issue of privilege when it comes to that. But then you also have to be free thinking enough to see outside of the lines that were drawn from us for us. When Trump says black jobs, it's like people are like, oh my God, what did he mean? Y'all knew exactly what he meant. I could point to like 5 or 6 jobs that y'all would say are black jobs. We could point to 5 or 6 jobs that y'all would say are Latin aid jobs because the you see people that look like you working, or he sees people that look like you working in these organizations in these particular jobs. I can think of like, and it's racist. It's absolutely a racist point of view, but they're like, honestly,
Absolutely.
like I said, what we're expected to do is at every single level. So for me, like it took
Yeah.
privilege for me to understand, okay, I can not
Mhm.
make money for 2 years and struggle in my business and I have a fallback because my parents worked so we can have a house. I
Yeah.
can work a side job and not have to make 6 figures because I don't have to send money back home. Cool. But it also
Mhm.
took me realizing why was I told the job at
Yeah.
Goldman Sachs would make me feel free? Like would money buy,
Right.
can I buy my freedom? Can I buy my way out of my blackness? Can I
Mm.
work my way out of my blackness? And I
Yeah.
think about these concepts all the time and it's like we're
Yeah.
always there's every single level we're expected to do and be something at every level of
Mhm.
society. And I
Mhm.
think like in high school it was like you really going to be that, you're going to study that hard for that test and go to that school. Yeah, I'm going to. When I got to that school, it was like, oh well, you're really going to turn down the ability to make millions of dollars in a short
Mhm.
career path to build this thing. What if it doesn't work? What if it So I think about this from a 360 degree, as in like we are literally like mentally in chains. And
Mhm.
hopefully I'm not like flying too much. I think I
No,
might
at
be
all.
flying a bit too much
No,
where
no,
we
no. I feel
no,
you. I feel you
yeah,
100%.
we are literally like mentally in chains and it's going to take a lot
Yeah.
of work to get us out of it. And like we talked about today, like not only does the affirmative action hurt the diversity in terms of like, no longer having people who look differently sitting across from you, but it also hurts us internally. And we constantly feel like, I have to do this, I have to be this. So you have people like, and this is my
Mhm.
fear, but I think this is happening because of the verdict. People checking out of college. Not that college is the end all be all, because it's like, dang,
Right.
like I don't stand a chance anymore. And then the people inside the institutions feeling like they have to prove over time. Let me be the right type of
Right.
X race because they admitted me. Let me be the right type of black. Let me not put this money to waste. I was told I was wasting my education, all different types of things. I had to shut the noise out. Because it's
Yeah.
like, how am I wasting my education? You talked about like, we'll work jobs that have nothing to do with our major. Granted, I use my business education to run my business, cool. But at the same time, it's like, I chose a different path. What's wrong with that? Oh, because respectability politics. Oh, because
Right.
like, you know,
Period.
you're better than those blacks. Why are you doing this
Mhm.
advocacy work? It's beneath
Right.
you.
Right.
It's beneath you because you're too educated for
Mhm.
it. Just
Yeah.
shut up and make your money. And I think that like this conversation brought me back to the fact that yeah, like the scripts for our lives are written. Either we're going
Mhm.
to rewrite them or
Right.
they're going to be etched in stone.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for
I
this conversation.
completely
Yeah,
no, I completely feel you. I completely
yeah,
feel you. And when you said like, is this can I buy my way? Can I buy my freedom? Like, can I buy my way out of my blackness? And I think that that's so It's so deep. You know,
Yeah.
it's profound because it's like, I mean, it made me think about indentured servitude, right?
Yeah.
Like sharecroppers, like you can, you just work hard enough to, you know, pay off your debt, quote unquote, and then you can have freedom. And it's never been true. It's
Yeah.
never been true. It wasn't true then, and it's not true now. And so I completely feel you. And I think that the respectability politics, I see it in the Latina community as well. You know, Latinos for Trump. There are a
Yeah.
lot of light skinned white Latina people who have been given opportunities that other people were not given.
Yeah.
And I grew up in Miami. And so, you know, Cubans were given amnesty specifically to drain Cuba
Mm.
of wealthy people, right? They were given amnesty here in the United States. I don't know if you know about this law that was passed during the I think it was during the Cuban Missile Crisis and during the embargo. And it's basically like if a Cuban steps foot on American soil, they're automatically a resident
Mm.
of the United States, which, by the way, if you are, you know, if you're a refugee, it's extremely hard to get political amnesty. Haitians were not given the same, even though
No, they were
they
not.
have endured
Mm.
horrific
Mhm.
experiences. And so, but this was given to the Cubans because obviously there were a lot of wealthy white Cubans in Cuba that wanted to move, and so they were given this right, and then they built a lot of wealth because they were able to create businesses, hire their families, and they built wealth within their community. And now they have political power. So now they're
Mm.
turning around and being like, well, why couldn't anybody else do this? Why
Yeah.
can't Black
Mm.
Latinos do this? Right? Why
Yikes.
can't Indigenous Latinos do this?
Mm.
When literally they were given a leg up, right?
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing. And it's like, it's you see the same pattern being repeated over and over. And we're not, and those folks are wealthy and they're
Mhm.
thinking that because they align themselves with whiteness, that they're going to be free or they're going to be given the same power. And that is simply not
Yeah.
true, right?
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
it's a whole charade. And so honestly, when I think about it a little too hard, it gets a little it gets a little depressy Jesse. You know what I'm saying? Because it's a
No, it
lot.
it does. I hope I didn't like 'cause this conversation, we just floated. Like, we
Yeah.
moved all the way to respect it, but I think it was such a great time to
Mhm.
converse with you because I feel like you get it. Like, you get it
Yeah.
and you understand it and you understand the nuances of it. And there's many people trying to avoid the nuances of, like, honestly, I read this thing and it was dedicated to Black women, but I think it could be dedicated to anyone. It was like, Black women, you can't achieve your way out of oppression. I was like, man,
Yeah.
shoot.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, is this where my drive comes from?
Mhm.
Wanting to achieve my way out of my
Yeah.
Blackness? And I
Yeah.
had to reflect on it because it's like, I think we want to achieve, and that's a great thing.
Mhm.
But we also have to notice and take note of the fact that, man, maybe my drive is me having that chip on my shoulder. Because
Mhm.
I was told nobody that looks like me can own what I own.
Yep.
Nobody that looks like me can go where I'm trying to go.
Yep.
Um, and it's like, dang, like, can we achieve our way out of oppression? I don't know if we can, because we can't,
And
you
it's
know?
crazy because then once you get there, you're like, oh wait, this shouldn't be anybody's dream. Like, you know, when you talk
Mm,
about this achieving your way
yeah,
out of your oppression, you know, we have to think about the fact that individualism is also part of our capitalist society and how like
yeah,
it's like you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and it's like, okay, if you made it, if you somehow, you know, like got lucky or you have some sort of privilege and you were able to make it through and you know, achieve middle class or um, high economic status, right? Like, then that's good. But then what about the rest of your community, right? And so that is
yeah.
individual
Mm,
liberation versus collective liberation. And
oof,
collective liberation has to do with upending the system to begin with. The fact that it is not fair, it's not just,
yeah,
that some people will never be able to achieve um, they'll never be able to achieve financial stability. They'll never be able to achieve health, like physical health, mental health, right? Like just basic needs, even. That whole, that's what collective liberation is about. It's about taking
yeah,
transforming that system, or totally dismantling it so that we can all have access to a high quality of life that is not tied to work. Please,
Mm.
God,
Oof.
that is not tied to work.
Oof. Listen, when you said Latinos for Trump, like, I thought about my own family and how the
Yeah.
wealthier people of my family did vote for him.
Hmm.
You know, and I think
Yeah.
it's this thing of like our income being a shield, like, and something that separates us from other people rather
Oh
than, like
yeah.
you talked about, a tool for collective liberation. So it's tough, but for those of us in the equity space, I just want to say it on this podcast, I'm proud of us, because we're not only just pursuing our goals as entrepreneurs, founders, leaders, but other people's breakthrough, other people's achievement is tied to ours. So we create this ripple effect. And that's why I'm always excited when I see leaders say, like, man, like, I'm unapologetically in the equity space, or I'm unapologetically doing it for this group or that group. Cause it's like, that's what we need. Like, we need
Mhm.
our individual success to be tied to the success of others. We need to develop those
Yeah.
systems. And I think, like, when you said Latinos for Trump, I could think of the Black people that I know that voted for Trump. Like, it's this thing of like, their mindset is, man, I did it. We did it. So if y'all haven't done
Right.
it, peace out. Me and my family are good. I don't care if police are voting immunity. I don't care about Project 2025. I don't care about
Yeah.
anything like that, because I'm good. My family's good. Bye. So
Right.
I'm optimistic for the future of leadership, for the future of business, and the entrepreneurial leaders showing up and saying, man, this isn't just about money. This is about this
Right.
community. This is about equity.
Right.
This is about diversity. This is about justice, belonging, inclusion,
Period.
representation. I think there is a shift, because I'm seeing founders and I'm like, okay, you're not just doing it for you, you're doing it for your communities. And it's showing. We're showing up differently. So I'm excited about that. All right, y'all. This was a really good conversation. It really was. And I think we covered a lot. We did cover a lot. We covered a lot more than we intended to cover. That was the huge blessing. So, y'all, yeah, this will be a bonus episode. Some thoughts and reflections on affirmative action, respectability, politics, and more, with me and Dr. Nicole. Yes.
Can
Okay,
I say
y'all.
one final
Yeah.
thing
Jump
before
in.
we leave? 'Cause I know we kind of ended on a really kind of depressing note. I just want to
Yeah.
say, like, for anybody out there that's feeling despair around all of these negative things that are happening,
Yeah.
I saw a TikTok. I'm not going to say I read it somewhere. I saw it on a TikTok.
Yeah.
Somebody was talking about how, whenever we see these huge waves of people lashing out and creating these laws that negatively affect marginalized people, it's because there is a shift happening culturally. It's like the last tantrum that people can throw. So
Yeah.
I just want to say that I'm doing this work because I have hope, because it is changing. And that's why these are sort of like the Hail Marys that are happening,
Yeah.
because it's
Mm.
like the last cry of a dying culture. And
Mm.
that's what we're seeing. But it's not going to
Yeah.
be like that forever. And we have to
Mm-hmm.
continue to work toward liberation together, not as individuals, but as collectives.
Yeah.
And so I just want to offer that nugget of hope among the fucking trash that we're
Yeah.
experiencing here?
That absolutely. And thank you for tying it up, because I tried to tie it up. But essentially, y'all, people like myself and Dr. Nicole are doing the work. And I think not just us, but there are hundreds, millions of people
Oh,
doing the
yeah.
work. And
Mhm.
I think we're all committed to working where we're at in our small little chunk of the world, doing the
Yeah.
work. And if
Yeah.
enough of us step up and do the work, help each other, promote each other, work with each other, collaborate, support, it can happen. Things can change. So I'm excited for the future, because I think even our ability to have this conversation lets me know, like, people are waking up.
Yeah.
People are waking
For
up and realizing we have a part to play all of us have a part to play. And what
Yeah.
part am I going to play in the broader scheme of things? All right, y'all, this is Surayya, and I'm out. Take care. Bye.